I really appreciate Dayton taking the class for me last week. I've looked at his notes, so it's not like I need to look at his notes to see that he did a good job, but when I look at his notes, I appreciate the good job he did. Oh, you can't hear? We need a little more volume in the back. Thank you. Please do that every time you have problems hearing, because we need to be able to hear. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Is that any better? Yeah. That's good? Okay. Oh, Virgil says take it up a little more. When the lamp, now he's messing with us now. When the light fixtures vibrate, that's about right. So, all right, we are in Proverbs, coming back to Proverbs. Had a good introduction last week, and so let's start in chapter 4, and I will just kind of add to with some of my own introductory type remarks. There's Dayton. He missed his thank you. I was just telling everybody what an awesome job you did last week, and I wasn't even here. In chapter 4, this is a context that's important to me as a man, and it especially was when I was a young man, because the context of Proverbs is Solomon teaching his sons the wisdom of the Proverbs. So somebody read the first 5 verses of chapter 4 for us. Proverbs chapter 4, 1 through 5. Who's got it? Need a reader. All right, Chuck.
4, 1 through 5?
Yes.
Listen, my sons, to a father's instructions. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. When I was a boy in my father's house, still tender, and an only child of my mother, he taught me and said, lay hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands with you, and you will live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or swerve from them.
All right. So this is Solomon teaching his sons, but where does Solomon say he got this teaching? Got it from his father, who was David. So it's interesting to me when I think about this, because I always connect Proverbs to Solomon, but Solomon says, I got this from my dad. So David was a man of wisdom and Proverbs, and he taught these things to Solomon. And of course, if you know Solomon's story, God offered him anything he wanted, and what did Solomon ask for? He asked for wisdom above all. And so Solomon was gifted by God with wisdom above every man who's ever lived except the good Lord himself. And so that's pertinent to what we're seeing in the record of the Proverbs. So this always helped me when I read through Proverbs and realized that it seems to be coming most often from a man's perspective, because, well, it's a father teaching his sons. And so when he talks about a cranky woman, he's not leaving out the fact that there are some cranky men as well. It's just a dad talking to his sons, and so that's where it would come from. That's what that's all about. Now, as far as wisdom itself, another thing that I guess, to use a turn of phrase in our vernacular, something that spoke to me was when Solomon personified wisdom. Yes, Billy.
He refers to wisdom as woman.
Yes.
Will. You know, and if you think about women, patience, kind, gentleness, long-suffering. You know, we're men, hurry up, get this done, get it over with. You know? Yeah. But it's always been interesting to me that the analogy here is wisdom and instruction from a woman. So sometimes, men, it's good to listen to your wives. And I'm just about that.
Well, that goes all the way back to Genesis 2, where God said, it's not good for man to be alone. We need to get this boy some help. So that's exactly what he did. And Solomon here, check out verses 6 and following. After Solomon says, sons, listen up. This is wisdom I got from my dad, and I'm passing it on to you. He says this in verse 6. Well, somebody read for us 6 through 9, please. Who's got it? Proverb. Okay, Carolyn.
Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. Exalt her, and she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee to honor, and when thou dost embrace her, she shall give to thine head an ornament of grace, a crown of glory shall she deliver to thee. That's a tongue twister.
Yeah, it really is. A lot of these are, but that's okay. A skunk sat on a stump, and the stump said the skunk stunk, and the skunk said the stump stunk. So it just takes some time, and you'll realize that Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. And when she sells seashells by the seashore, anyway, what am I doing that for? Well, it's funny, but it's also true what Carolyn said, that some of these are tongue twisters. But if we apply ourselves, you realize, wow, there's some really good stuff here. If I had never learned that thing about the skunk, I'd probably still feel like I was something less of a man than I could have been. But I learned it. That's absolutely true of these Proverbs. And as a young man, when I read Proverbs and I saw, wow, wisdom is a woman, I thought, oh boy. Because young men, most young men, even the ones that think they know, don't know anything about women. Yeah, I heard a giggle. That's okay. You can giggle about that. And I'm 60, almost 62, and I still don't know much. Except, like Billy said, agree with them, because they're right a lot of the time. And they were given to us by God to help us. So as a young man, trying to figure out girls, I didn't have to figure out this one. I knew this one was going to be good to me all the time, and there was no mystery there in the same sense that there are other mysteries with other girls. And girls are just people too, but this wisdom, she was always right on. She was always good to me, and I didn't have to figure her out. So, and another thing that Solomon says, well, he starts in chapter 1, really, talking about wisdom as a woman. Look at verse 20 of chapter 1. Wisdom shouts in the street. She lifts her voice in the square. At the head of the noisy street, she cries out. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she utters her sayings. This is chapter 1. I had started at verse 20. Now I'm down to verse 22. How long, O naive ones, will you love being simple-minded? And scoffers delight themselves in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge. Turn to my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you, and I will make my words known to you. As a young guy, you're always trying to figure out how to approach the girls. Well, here's a girl who's out in the street. She's crying, hey, come to me. I'm going to help you out. Oh, all right. I think I can date her. She'll go with me. And then you get down to chapter 3 and verse 13. He picks up this idea again. I remember when I was in school and they were teaching us about personification. That's one literary device that made sense to me. When you take an idea and you talk about that idea as if it is a person, then it's much more relatable for a lot of us than it was for me. And this is one that was great in my youth especially. Chapter 3, verse 13. How blessed is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding, for her profit is better than the profit of silver, her gain better than fine gold. She is more precious than jewels. Nothing you desire compares with her. Long life is in her right hand, and her left hand there are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all those who hold her fast. What does a young man want to do but hold a woman? Oh boy, that's exciting. But you know you can get in trouble for that. But here's a woman that you can hold on to, and God is saying, find this one and hold on to her. And it's a marvelous thing to be able to see wisdom like this as a person that you can have a relationship with that's always going to be good to you, and you don't have to worry about the same kinds of things you worry about with an individual. Because as people, we have relationships, and no matter how good the other person is, they're going to do goofy things sometimes too. But here's a woman who's never going to do anything goofy. She's never going to change her mood in such a way that, well, okay, you better stay away from her now. No, wisdom is always approachable. And of course, in the context, I'm seeing this as a young man, as a young man's point of view, but you can switch it around. If you're looking for a good man, you won't find a better one than wisdom in the same sense, I believe, because wisdom pulls out of us the best that is in us, all the potential that we have, is there to be had if we approach life with wisdom. And this is what Solomon's doing with the Proverbs. He's giving us this idea that the Word of God really is living and active. That's a passage from Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12. The Word of God is living and it is active, and that's what Solomon is presenting to us in Proverbs. This is the Word of God. It's not just some wise writing from ancient times, but this is the way life works. These are the mechanics of life. And if we embrace this, life is going to be a whole lot better. A whole lot better. Observations, questions, comments? Am I making too much of the personification, or have I not made enough? All right, Harold? Yes. Right. Yes. I agree. John?
At least I did for a long time. It took me a while to figure out there is a difference.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of smart men that are dead, but a lot of wise men that are old.
Right. And that's something we've got to figure out as we go through life, because we talk about being smart, we talk about having knowledge and knowing, but there's also wisdom, and it's a completely different thing, but they work together. You can't have one without the other. It's like internal combustion. What do you have to have for internal combustion? Do what? Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to interpret that one. Got to have air. Got to have fuel. Got to have compression. Got to have fire. Yeah, you got to have all that stuff. And the tendency in human beings is to say, well, which one's the best? No, that's not the way to look at it. God hasn't created a world in which you find the one best thing. He's created a world in which there's all kinds of good things that work together. Somebody asked the question, who likes lard? Anybody like to have a big mouthful of lard? How about flour? How about a big mouthful of flour? How about eggs? Anybody want a big old raw egg to chew on or suck on? But what happens if you put flour and lard and eggs together and then you bake it for make cake, make biscuits, make all kinds of fantastic things. But that's it working together, and that's the way this world is. God's given us all kinds of things, and this is the way it works. Wisdom, knowledge. You got to have knowledge, because wisdom is using your knowledge to work through something. And somebody once well said, I wrote it down, I think, in the back of my Bible. This is one of those things. Sometimes I write things down in the back of my Bible. Good judgment or wisdom comes from experience, but most experience comes from poor judgment. You see the wisdom in that? When you do dumb stuff, things happen, and you go, oh, I better not do that again. I need to think about this. Billy?
It's the Father's instructions. The reason the Father gives this to the Son is because it has worked for the Father.
Right.
He's seen this practical application in his own life and wants to give that to his Son that he can draw upon to do and have a better life. And don't we all want that,
Absolutely. And this is the Father teaching what his Father taught him now to his Son. And we know the way that works in life. When we are young and our parents are trying to tell us stuff, what are we normally doing? Oh, yeah, Dad, you're old fogey. My mom, she doesn't know anything. She's old. She's almost 35. And that's just the way we see things. Wilma?
Used to, years ago, sometimes we'd say book sense, horse sense is sometimes better than book sense.
Right. Now, there's a place for both.
Yes.
There's a place for both. But horse sense, what is...
Horse sense is better.
Do you ever wonder how horse sense came to be a term? Is it because some horses are smarter than people when it comes to practicality of how to do things. There's a lot to be learned all over the world, and when you read Proverbs, you start figuring that out. You can look to everything and find wisdom because God's the one who built the world and everything in it, and so there's wisdom in the world. It's just a matter of us figuring out we don't know everything. We are not the source of ultimate wisdom and knowledge. There's a source, but it's not us. And if we pay attention to that source and humble ourselves to it, there's a lot of good stuff to be gained. All right. With those introductory remarks, let's take a look at a specific in Proverbs where Solomon addresses anger. He addresses a lot of things, and if you've got your notes from last week that Dayton provided, he gave us a great list of individual studies in Proverbs that you can go to, and it's amazing to me. I hate to use that word because it's overused these days, but it really does amaze me how much God packed into this short volume through Solomon's wisdom about so many different topics and subjects. But let's talk about anger. Anybody ever get angry in here? Just watch the news. That's all it takes for me. Chapter 10, verse 12. Let's start there. See what Solomon has to say about anger and things associated with anger and circumstances revolving around anger. Chapter 10, verse 12. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all transgressions. Well, what is there in verse 12 about anger? Is it there? What's that? Okay. But hatred is the word, the English word that's used here. Why hatred, not anger? Where does hatred come from? What's that? Okay. Right. We
whatever, the noise, whatever. I think that's how it's born. It's not just, oh, I hate that out of the blue. There's a trigger mechanism there repeated
Right.
to get to that point.
Something's out of order in our minds, not in our minds, but our mind is telling us that something's out of order. Well, sometimes something's out of order in our minds too. But we see that the world has order, and we appreciate that order, and when something is not the way it's supposed to be, it just becomes frustrating, especially when you see it over and over and over. It's a continual thing, and it seems to never stop. And an occasional thing out of order, well, okay, we can put up with that. But when it's just constant, it just grates on you.
I would present that hatred is a sin, but anger is constant.
Okay.
That's what you do with your anger that can be constant. The feeling of anger, you have righteous anger, you have different types of anger. But according to the scripture, we never really hate.
Yes. Well, there's even a place for hatred if we understand hatred for what it is, to hate sin. And hate is expressed sometimes as a feeling, an emotion that even God himself has. But you're right. You're absolutely right. That when we have this sensation of anger or hatred that leads to anger, those two things can bring us to the point where we're right at the edge of sin. Now, they can push us to advance into doing something fantastic and wonderful and righteous about what's wrong, or they can ruin us. It's kind of like when you're on the interstate. Up there in North Dakota, they have 80-mile-an-hour speed limit. That's fantastic. Unless you come up on a semi that's not going 80 miles an hour. 80 miles an hour is fantastic when the coast is clear and you're guiding yourself, but it's not good when circumstances dictate. And that's where we've got to be careful about hatred and anger, because it can take us places we don't want to go if we're not prepared to guide our emotions and our thoughts and the whole process behind it. And that's why there are so many passages in Proverbs warning us about anger and hatred.
A person, but I think over time you end up hating the person.
We can.
Keep it in check and whatever, right?
Right.
Not to fix it, but I'm saying it festers and goes on to where you end up hating the person and because they did something or said something.
Right. And sometimes I have to ask myself, okay, if that person changed their behavior, would I still hate them? I mean, if I feel that way towards them. You can't always help your feelings. You can always help your behavior. You can't always help your feelings, but you can always control your behavior if you're willing to do that. But if somebody changes their behavior and they're not behaving in the way that irritates me, but I still feel badly towards them, then that's an issue with me rather than with them. Chapter 12, verse 16. A fool's anger is known at once, but a prudent man conceals dishonor. So what two things are being juxtaposed here in verse 16? There's anger in the first line. What's in the second line that relates to the anger? The dishonor. A fool's anger is known at once, but a prudent man conceals dishonor. Whatever there's anger about, there's something dishonorable about that. A fool's anger, is a fool's anger honorable? Not in this context. A fool's anger is dishonorable. And so the second line is a prudent man. What does prudent mean? Wise. Just another word for wise. A wise man conceals dishonor. Comments, questions, observations? John?
The fool, so to speak, in this context, is that maybe getting angry, mad, bent, whatever, over nothing? There's no reason to be that mad, so that, if there's something done that makes sense to be mad about, then there's a reason for the anger. I don't think that is foolish, but if somebody, if there's nothing there, you're making a federal case out of nothing, then that's foolish.
Right.
I mean, that's my interpretation. Am I wrong?
Well, there's a lot of power in emotion, but if we're not constantly controlling our emotions, then you wind up, I sold my motorcycle. Not really. I had a 1974 Z1 Kawasaki 903 cc's. All right, 75 was a little bit, they said improved, but I still think the 74 was better. Yeah. Well, but the 750 triple was, okay, well, anyway. The thing is, this motorcycle had 5 forward speeds, and it was the fastest production bike made in 1974. There weren't any faster motorcycles. In first gear, I could do 55 miles an hour. Second gear, I was way over 80. And I was young when I had this bike, and so I did that kind of stuff a lot. And I told myself, this is not only highly illegal, this is very dangerous. And I will never forget, any of you heard of Lake Mead around Las Vegas? There was a big lake, and it's nothing but rocks and water. And I had a nice road around it, and I was riding on that road, and I was at this, there was a cut through where they'd come through these big boulders, and there was boulders on this side and boulders on that side, and I thought this would be a good place to accelerate. And I cracked the throttle, and my hand slipped back off the throttle. And I'm trying to reach back up and get that thing, and I'm thinking, I'm going to die right here. I'm going to hit that rock, and they're going to be scraping Marty Kessler off that rock for the next 2 weeks. And I finally got back under control of that thing. But for me, that's an illustration of what this anger can be like. I've got all these horsepower just ready to go at a moment's notice. And it's exciting, it's exhilarating to crank the throttle on that. And sometimes anger can be the same way. It's fun to get angry. Just let yourself go. Oh, your emotions, everything comes to the top. Especially when you think you're justified. But when you allow that to happen, you put yourself in a situation where you can wind up dead, spiritually speaking. Real quick, Dayton and then Carolyn.
I was watching Dr. Phil last week, and two individuals spent about 10 minutes bickering at each other, and actually their comments to each other just became more intensified with the moments. And finally he stopped both of them and asked the one, "Are you saying that you're a victim of this person's anger and wrath and response?" "Yes." Turned to the other, "Are you a victim of this?" And yes. Both of them were victims, and an audience sitting out there without a great deal of maybe physiological or psychological insight saw that both of them were being done in some of their reasoning. But they couldn't see the nature of that reasoning while they were defending themselves against the other person, making them a victim.
Right.
Well, of course, the conclusion was, will both of you now go to someone who can see what's good in each of you? And there was some good that had been in there somewhere, but it was lost. Lost completely in the furor that was going on. And so that's the way many people live with each other. There's a little bit of good and every bad little boy, it was a statement.
Right.
And if you can bring that good to the surface a little bit, you can remove a lot. And then neither is a victim, both is a personality blessed.
It's interesting, the observation you made, that the crowd watching this, observing this, could see it. These people are both being dumb. Because when I was riding my motorcycle, and I'd everywhere I'd go, what do you think when you see some guy out here in a hot car and he burns rubber and peels? What do you think? Oh, that's a really cool guy. He's really, he's something else. Yeah. You think, what? What's that? I missed that. What'd you say? He's an organ donor. Don't most of us think, what an idiot. What a goofball. And it's the same thing when we're always letting our anger get the best of us. We think, oh, I'm being strong and I'm being powerful, and everybody else is looking and going, you're an idiot. Because very seldom are we impressed with anger unless we see somebody getting angry over some righteous, just cause and taking steps to address that cause. Carolyn and then Don.
You know, Chad loves his motorcycle. I mean, he adores it. Personally, I wish it would implode right where it's sitting. Seriously. And he knows I feel that way.
Well, it's just,
He used to get angry, but now he just laughs it off.
yeah. It's the access to power is what it is. That's the thing about a lot of motorcycles and fast cars. Nothing wrong with having a fast motorcycle or a fast car. I just knew when I got married, I need to get rid of this thing. I'm going to kill myself or maim myself. Anyway, but that's the thing with anger. It's quick access to power. It's like a rush. And if you get addicted to that, because people on meth, you've seen the pictures of the progression of people who get on meth, and they look nice and young and wholesome when they get started, and then in a very short time, they look like they've aged 90 years. It's horrible. They don't see it. Why don't they see it? I thought if you just show these people these pictures, they'll stop that stuff. Oh, no. They love that rush. They love what the meth provides, and so they don't stop, and they ruin themselves in the process. Don?
In reference to righteous anger and unrighteous anger.
Yes.
Most of the time when I search myself, I see most of the time my anger is because it's something I want anyway. You know, someone's getting in my way of doing it or wanting it or getting it or whatever it is, just whatever the situation. And I find that my anger rises quickly when I'm defending myself or I want something, I want it to rise up. I'm pretty good about holding my tongue, but my thoughts go wild.
Yeah.
but when I search through it, thinking of God's perspective, looking at their side of it and my side of it, I can tell this is just selfishness. I want this, so I seem righteous and, want to defend myself, like you said. Now, when it's a righteous anger, I found that my escalation is much slower. Probably because it's not against me,
Right.
It's against somebody else, or, whatever, And so I find that the escalation is slower, and you can really think it out. Now, obviously, it's good to stand up for that, but man, when you want to open your mouth fast, it's usually probably your own selfishness. I found with me.
Right. How many times in the Gospels do we read about Jesus being angry? Okay, Will, you're next. Was there anybody else? All right. Oh, okay, Frank.
I think temper's involved in that too. If we didn't let our temper run away with us, we wouldn't get angry to start.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Got to keep control of your temper all the time. What's that? Well, yeah, that's an excuse for a lot of folks. Will, and then we'll get back to the question.
To touch on what Dawn had said, I'd been thinking kind of the same thing. When you're angry and you let your emotions kind of go, and you actually think about, after everything is said and done, and you think about why you're angry, the level of anger and emotion that you had isn't adequate to the situation. It's not appropriate. You're letting it go way past what it really should have gone for whatever the situation was. And I've heard that Satan uses that and amplifies whatever situation to get you angry, or more angry than you should be about that, and can deceive you in certain ways and can use that against you to make you sin. Is it wrong to be angry? No, but don't sin in your anger.
Right.
It's much more difficult to do that when you're angry because your emotions aren't accurate. Now, again, what Don said as far as a righteous anger, if you're angry about something, you kind of temper that anger more slowly and more appropriately. You apply the appropriate amount of emotional response and energy towards what it is than if it's, oh, I'm just angry because this guy cut me off or whatever. So I think that as far as controlling your anger and taking a step back and really examining what you're angry about to apply the appropriate emotional response to it would be wise.
Right, self-examination for that anger. And you go to Lowe's, you go to Home Depot, you go to Ace Hardware. Next time you're there, you don't have to make a special trip just for this, but that wouldn't be bad either. Go to the hand tool area and look at all the different sizes of hammers. How wide-ranging are the sizes of hammers? You got these little bitty hammers with a brass head or with a plastic head, and then you got a 5-pound, 10-pound sledge. Those are fun, as long as you hit what you're supposed to hit. And if the only hammer you've got is really larger for the job, what do you have to do? If it's larger than what you need for the job, you got to be very gentle and careful with that big hammer. And that's the way anger is. It's a big hammer. Be careful with your big hammer. Sometimes it needs to come down hard, but sometimes, wow, you just need to, let's pull it back a little. Let's rein this in. Let's gain control and do it right.
Excellent illustration of what Solomon is emphasizing here as to anger relates to wisdom. I've heard at Abilene Christian while I was going there, 2 or 3 of the social clubs were wanting this or wanting that, and some thinking they ought to stop talking about this, and the others thinking we need to emphasize that. And here they were. It was causing unrest all over the campus. And Tonto Coleman, who was the football coach, head football coach, and quite an after-dinner speaker, spoke in chapel one day in the midst of people really getting upset all over the campus. It's just negativism floating in every direction. And he spoke for about 15 minutes in regard to what is good about Abilene Christian. And that whole thing just faded away. There's wisdom applied, and the good that was among a lot of the students' service.
Right.
And
Of course, anybody who's ever watched Lone Ranger knows that anybody named Tonto is going to have wisdom to offer. But that's true, and the potential for good behavior has to be there. And when it's there, and it's in you and it's in me, that potential is what we need to be tapping. Because we care about doing the right thing. That's why we're here this morning. We care about God. We care about Jesus. We care about doing the right thing. And when we follow in His footsteps, we find ourselves being less and less angry about all the wrong things. And back to that question, how many times do we read about Jesus being angry in the Gospels? Okay. Okay. So he behaved in a way that makes us think he was angry about that. I don't know that any of the writers say he was angry. I wouldn't argue with anybody who said he was. But hardness of heart was the one thing that we see Jesus getting angry about. And you would think, I'll put it that way, I would think that as you read through the Gospels, you would see Jesus being angry on so many different occasions. Who had more cause to be angry than Jesus? And yet we just don't read about that much. I believe it's because he never took anything personally. But how many things were aimed at him personally? Didn't matter. It's like those big German Tiger tanks in World War II when our Shermans would come up, the first time Shermans, pow, bling, ricochets right off. Like, oh, did somebody shoot at us? And that's the way we need to be. We need to be so at home with the Lord that when somebody says something about us, we just might go, wow, did you hear what they said? It's like, and God goes, yeah, I heard that. Big deal. Who does he think he is? You know who I am. Jesus was so comfortable with who he was and what the truth was that he didn't feel like he needed to get upset. Now, I'm projecting what I'm thinking he thought on him, but the fact is, he didn't get angry all the time. I think he got frustrated with his apostles, perhaps, sometimes. Have I been so long with you? How many times did he ask that? But anger, it just wasn't an often seen part of his nature and his behavior. And I think that's significant to me because he had so much reason to be angry. Nobody was more contradicted or confronted than Jesus, and yet he always held himself in reserve when he could have, with a thought, okay, let your left eye fall out of your head there. Okay, now, what else you got to say? He didn't do that. The song says he could have called 10,000 angels. Well, that's inaccurate. There's about 6,000 soldiers in a legion, and how many did Jesus say he could call? 12. So that's not 10,000, that's 72,000 angels. But that doesn't go well in a song. He could have called 72,000 angels. Anyway, 10,000 sounds a lot better song-wise. All right, let's get back to, anybody have anything that I missed? Any hands that I didn't catch? Oh, Paul.
Anger is a byproduct of other things.
Yes.
Whether it's a lack of love or lack of understanding in the situation or lack of patience or whatever. The problem really becomes when you're always angry. You need to really start asking yourself, this is your condition and I'm just kind of ticked off all the time. You got to really start asking yourself the question, how much space is there for love?
Right.
How much space is, are you feeding on the word? How much do you understand and actually doing? If you're always angry, it could be a chemical issue also. I'm not saying it's an analogy, but if you're always angry, you got to ask yourself the question.
That is a good question to ask. And it was a revelation to me when somebody said that a lot of anger is based in fear. Anger is based in fear. How can that be? And then I started thinking about it. Well, that makes a lot of sense. When I see something that makes me afraid that things are going in a direction I don't want them to go, and I can't control it, I can't pull it in, like with your kids. Your kids are doing something that they shouldn't do. You can reach over, hey, get back over here. You mind your P's and Q's, or you will go to the bathroom with you and whatever. You can control your kids. But when things are going on in the world or in life and you can't control it, it might make you afraid that hey, we can't get this back. And that fear will cause you to become angry. Frustration is another idea, another emotion that figures into this, because when you get frustrated with things, frustration might start out kind of low level, but it builds into the point where you get angry. John? Oh, no, Mike.
Mark 3:5. In Mark 3:5, they asked Jesus, about is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or evil?
Right.
To save life or kill. Then in verse 5 it says, he looked around at them in anger.
Yes.
So he was angry.
Yeah, it was anger.
Now that's an NIV.
Okay.
Maybe another translation uses another word.
No, he got angry there.
He got angry.
I didn't mean to say that he never got angry, but it's just very few times you read about it, and that's the one. He got angry at their hardness of heart. And shouldn't we get angry? When you see somebody who needs help and somebody goes, well, I don't know, it's Sunday. What? How can the day that God has designated as a holy day be a reason not to help somebody who's in need? Anyway, that was Jesus getting angry. We've had a bell. Let's see, where should we go here? Chapter 14, verse 17. Here you go, Frank. A quick-tempered man acts foolishly. That's what you were talking about a little while ago. A quick-tempered man acts foolishly. A man of evil devices is hated. So what's being compared in verse 17 of chapter 14? A quick temper is compared to evil devices. What's an evil device? A device is something you use to get something accomplished. What's the device here?
Get angry.
Right.
He's using that anger. Oh, do it my way, or I'm going to
Right.
snap.
His temper is his device. His anger is his device. And it's an evil device. Quick-tempered man acts foolishly, and a man of evil devices is hated. Chapter 14, verse 29. He who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered exalts folly. There's quite a contrast. Slow to anger, great understanding. Quick-tempered, folly. Do this, if you would. Go through Proverbs. It won't take you long. Just kind of skim through and look for every other passage, because there's a bunch of them that deal with anger or wrath, and mark those down and see which ones speak to you, as we say. There's a bunch of them. They all have something wonderful to offer. And in the process of looking for those, you'll find some other stuff in there that you'll go, wow, this is good. And you might forget about anger altogether because you found something else that's even better. This is like a treasure chest full of jewels. And sometimes you like the blue ones better than you like the red ones, and vice versa. And they all have different facets. This is fantastic stuff. And nobody can take it from you once you've got it. It's not something you'll lose. You don't have to rush to the bank to put it in a safe place. This is what God gives us that tends to life, and to life abundantly. That's what Jesus was talking about, and this is the kind of wisdom that works in that direction. Observations, comments? Okay. Thank you for being here. Class dismissed.